Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. And I am once again here with lecture 9 of drama 2, that is modern drama. Today's lecture is very important because we are not only going to finish with whatever we started in drama 1, in the very first drama of Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen, but it is going to be an introductory talk of our second content matter as well. So let's have a quick review on the synopsis. In the part 1 of the today's talk, we are going to talk about, very precisely though, about the dramatic structure of Doll's House, and then we'll move on to the conclusive talk on the Doll's House. In the second part of the talk, we will start with our orientation of the second drama text, that is Juno and the Peacock by Sean O'Casey. We will have an overview of the play that will include play's background, settings, plot, characters, a little bit of writer's life and work history, and the play and its social significance. Alright, so for now, let us go back to the part 1 of the drama that will discuss the thematic structure of Doll's House. And we will analyze the thematic structure, the kind of themes included in the play, by going through 3 different point of views given by different writers of that era. What writers have said about Henrik Ibsen, let us understand how the writing was perceived in that time and even in the times after. It was said all of Ibsen's drama, all of Ibsen is visionary drama. His mastery of inwardness is second only to Shakespeare's Harold Bloom. So Bloom says that Ibsen is a visionary writer who would like to provoke people to take some kind of action, and these actions are primarily for their own benefit, for their own welfare. His mastery of inwardness is second only to Shakespeare. This is a great compliment for Ibsen's writing. We understand Shakespeare as the master of dramatic art in English history. So, and Shakespeare is known for his understanding of his characters, not as characters, but for the inner self, inner talk of the characters, not only knowing it, but to conveying it to audience as well. He creates the plot, he creates a character, designs everything accordingly, and conveys it in a manner that readers and a screen watcher and the movie goers are able to understand what is happening inside the character. So here Bloom considers that Ibsen is not only a visionary drama writer, he is able to replicate the art of showing a character's inner self just as Shakespearean dramas did. Okay, so what Shaw says about Ibsen's work, George Bernard Shaw, famous modern drama writer, George says, had the gospel of Ibsen been understood and heeded, these 15 millions might have been alive now. Now, it has 3 different direct and indirect allusions in this saying, had the gospel of Ibsen. So Ibsen's works have been given the respect of gospel. And the writer says, Bernard Shaw says, if it had been given the privilege of being understood and heeded, if people are able to understand the message conveyed by Ibsen and they take care of that message, they are able to understand it and materialize it then these 15 million people, again a reference, people who were discussing the loss of life during World War I. George Bernard Shaw says, had this been understood and heeded, these 15 millions might have been alive now. Here he is referring to that useless slaughter of mankind that happened during World War I, and 15 million people lost their lives. Then, what E.M. Forster says about Ibsen's works, his characters may hate one another or be happy together, but they will generate nobility or charm. So, what Forster is throwing light on another very important aspect of Ibsen's work that relates his writing to domestic front of people's life. He says that although the characters presented in Ibsen's work, they are not the best characters, the best models of love and hatred. They may hate one another, they may love each other, as the life is. However, what they generate is nobility or charm. They let people know how things are, what reality is, and how this reality should be reflected and absorbed. So, we understand the thematic structure of Ibsen's play in all, and Ibsen's work, particularly in reference with A Doll's House, by the words of Harold Bloom, George Bernard Shaw, and E.M. Forster, in all three of them highlighting different aspects of his mastery of art. Someone calls him a visionary drama writer with a skill of showing the inner self of character. The other calls his work like gospel and giving it dignity of gospel. And then we get to know that his writings are not mere writings. It's not a mere description of society. It talks about the basic unit of society, that is a character, an individual. And it's not only talking about the appearances of individual, but the inner selves of individuals. So, moving on, let us start with the conclusive talk on The Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. What we have covered so far about the play and the writer. In the first two lectures, we went through the types of drama of modern era, the elements, the conventions, a brief history of drama to refresh your memories and letting you understand what were the conventions till the modern drama and how and why did they get different during the modern age. Then we talked about a few dramatic terminology to let you understand the discussion in a better way. And we had an introduction to modern drama where we understood how modern drama is different from classical drama. The lecture 2 made you understand the general historical introduction about modernism as a literary movement. It also talked about the social significance of modern drama and discussed the causes that led to modernism, the particular themes, and what were the functions of those themes in that particular time. And the time we specifically talked about was the time between by the end of World War I and before the beginning of World War II. We talked about the characteristics of the modern theatre as well and discussed them in relevance with the contemporary issue being represented in dramatic genre. We also talked about the native drama, the Norwegian drama, and what are the functions and characteristics of modern drama. The role of Scandinavian drama was also a concern, since the very first writer we started with was Henrik Ibsen, who was a Scandinavian writer. And we also discussed the major characteristics of Ibsen's work that include 4 cardinal sins of modern society. Moving on with lecture 3 and lecture 4, we talked about some very basic rules to how to study a drama and how to better understand it, comprehend it and interpret it. For that, we understood some very basic terminologies, understanding what conflict is, complexities are, what is this rising and falling action, what is plot denouement, catharsis, and how can we go deeper in text by understanding what makes a text of drama and what makes a subtext of drama, where we understood how can meaning be made by using literary devices such as imagery, symbols, metaphors, allegories, ambiguities, irony, allusion, and archetypes. We moved on with the discussion referring to the very first drama, and we had an overview of the drama in the very beginning, so you are able to easily understand about the characters and the themes being discussed. We also discussed all the characters and some of the major characters in detail, and then we analyzed them with a critical lens. Lecture 5 and 6 moved on with the similar intentions, where we critically analyzed the writing by discussing the characters in detail, themes in detail, and themes were also discussed by bringing forward the symbolic references and motifs used in the play. Lecture 7 and lecture 8 discussed the symbolism in drama in detail, and we critically analyzed 4 of the major issues being explored by Ibsen in this drama, that include social attitudes toward money, gender-related relationship attitudinal issues, and we also talked about the kind of development that takes place in the play, not only in the plot, in the story, but also in the characters who cause that story to move on. And we almost ended our discussion by discussing A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen as a wonderful representation of Ibsen's favorite subject, that is the social lie and duty, and how do they both get together to present the message, convey the message that Ibsen wanted to. So, this brings us to the end of the very first drama, and we are ready to start our discussion for the second drama, that is Juno and the Peacock by Sean O'Casey. In this lecture, I will not be giving you the complete story of the drama, will not be discussing the themes either. However, I will like to have the flavor of the drama, knowing how it is different from the text we analyzed so far, and whatever we are going to do, what is the relevance of this very text with the modern age. So, let's start with it. So, in our introductory talk based on Juno and the Peacock by Sean O'Casey, what we are going to be oriented with is the overview of the drama, the play's background, in which background the play was written, what are the settings of the play and what kind of atmosphere do they create, what is the plot precisely, what are the characters, then what is writer's life and work background. And this is important because you saw that when we were critically analyzing Ibsen's drama, we try to understand Ibsen's frame of mind with reference to the age and time he lived in. So similarly, this time also we will try to understand what is the biography of the writer and his works, and how we are able to relate the frame of thought that writer is presenting in his drama with the frame, with the history that he had before and after and during. We will also try to see if we are able to discuss the play and its social significance. This play was written during the Irish War. Irish War was basically war between two parties. One was the Republicans, the diehards, and the other was United people who wanted to have united Ireland. Now, who were these people who wanted united Ireland, and who are these diehards? Let's look into it. The Free Starters accepted the Government of Ireland Act of 1920. So the Government of Ireland presented an act in 1920 which basically started this conflict inside the country. The act says, act established the free state of the 26 countries. 6 countries remained under British rule, and this was known as Northern Ireland. So the point was that dividing Ireland into pieces and making one Ireland into 26 countries, where 6 countries only will remain under British rule and rest of 20 countries will be free states. Now, this very announcement of dividing the Ireland resulted in 2 different kind of groups who had different schools of thought. One group was known as Republicans, diehards, and other was known as free staters. One would want a free state with 26 countries, and the other would want all the states together as one country, as it has always been. So, Juno and the Paycock is set basically in the 1920s during the Irish War between these 2 parties. Now, the Civil War lasted until 1923. So we can see it's the 3 years of time period that was basically quite bloody and terrible. What happened during this war, as the warfare is, it resulted in where families and neighbors fought against each other, and many of them, rather most of them, lost their lives. So, going back and recalling in the type of settings where our very first drama was located, a doll's house. Again, it is the same kind of setting, same kind of chaos, same kind of disturbance, a shattered atmosphere where the writer is living and he is producing this drama. So how united, how normal, how thoughtful his writing would be, this is a question. The situation, the chaotic situation, is very much reflected in the play, and its pointlessness is highlighted through the characters. This word pointlessness demands your attention. War was considered pointless. It was just like people of a country, they were living all happy, they were living all fine, and all of a sudden government takes one action and things get changed, and people get into parties. A neighbor fight against his or her neighbor. So families are killing families. The families which were friends before the war, during the war, all of a sudden they became enemy, because now they belong to different schools of thoughts. Okay, this fatality is made all the more poignant through references to past romantic heroes and glorious episodes in Ireland's past. So writer is trying to add weightage in his writing and to convey depth of the scenario by providing us references from Irish past history, the heroes and the glorious people who fought for the country, Ireland. So we got to know that basically the bottom line, the theme of the play revolves around the pointlessness and futility of the everything that is happening during that time period. So let's have a look at the setting of the play. From the very opening sentence of the play, an impression is formed of the family's living conditions. These ideas are supported further and developed further in Act 1, Scene 1. So from the very first page, the very first lines are expressing the kind of condition the people of the country have been living in. And that is shown by keeping one family as a point of reference, that was Boyle's family. So what we are going to study is a drama regarding a family. This family is symbolic in nature because each character of this family basically portraying the characters of the society. If there is a mother, there is a father, there is a son, there is a daughter, they are not only presented as individuals but also as groups of people, how they have become during the World War, during the Irish War and after the Irish War. So drama starts in the living room where the family was living. The living room of a two-room tenancy occupied by the Boyle family in a tenement house in Dublin. So a two-room house very much presents what writer wants to convey about the condition of the family, that it's not a family who is enjoying a luxurious lifestyle. It's a kind of family which is living in hand-to-mouth condition where you do not have any privacy, you do not have any peace, you do not have any separate compartments for separate age of people, children, elders, they all are living together. Now what kind of atmosphere that would be, that let us understand the circumstances in the background where the writer is writing from. Cramped living conditions, so squeezed living condition, where there is no peace, where there is no space, where there is no privacy. So it's kind of cramped, kind of squeezed living conditions, which are not very much pleasing for any human living. That also tells us about the social status of the family, poverty. The prevailing aspect is poverty here. It's not only poverty, it's not only a bad living style, it lacks privacy. And then lack of privacy begets many other problems in a household, in a family's life. When you do not have privacy, there are problems, there are several problems that would take birth. And then it also talks about Irish historical background, a country where people would love living in a lavish lifestyle with in big houses, right? So in a contrast, it has become a condition where they are, where it has become indispensable to live in two-rooms house. So how the cramped living condition is portrayed, let me give you an example from the text. They all share just 2 rooms. And Johnny says, Johnny, can't you do it then without letting the whole house know you're taking off your trousers? So look at the kind of situation that they are living in. If one person is changing dress, all the other people in the house will get to know, even by the sound of it, the sound of the act, that this act is taking place. So what kind of privacy they would share in such a house, in such a living condition. About poverty, another reference from the text. Mrs. Boyle, he wore out the health insurance long ago. He's after wearing out the unemployment dole. So Mr. Boyle has already eaten up his health insurance. Now he's after his unemployment dole. A kind of person who would exercise all the means and all the ways to let the living go on, no matter whatever they are. There is no sense of right and wrong. There's no sense of dignity and pride. He's just doing whatever comes in his way to let the life move on. Now, if it is lacking privacy, Johnny, Owl Simon Mackey is triumphant about like a horse over my head. Now, you will find the language, in fact, in the very beginning, quite difficult to understand. However, when you start understanding the writer's writing style, this will be an added amusement in knowing this literature, because it shows shattered, insensible kind of attitude towards life. Here the writer is trying to tell us how one is behaving with other in a kind of situation where they, no matter if they want to, but they are not able to keep up with each other's privacy. Okay, then a reference for Irish historical background. Various references to the fighting, diehards, the Free State, etc. So how the Irish historical background will be flashing here and there in the drama will be the use of these spatial lexical forms, these words, which will let you understand that this play is written in this particular background. And the most often you will come across the words like fighting, diehards, Free State, etc. Okay, so between the window and the dresser is a picture of the Virgin. Below the picture on a bracket is a crimson bowl in which a floating light is burning. One very interesting thing about Sean O'Casey is that each and everything is thought-provoking, and each and everything is basically set in a particular kind of way that it adds into the meaning of the play. It adds into the theme of the play. So by showing between the window and the dresser is a picture of the Virgin, Mary Virgin, a religious figure. Below the picture on a bracket is a crimson bowl in which a floating light is burning. The very much image of a floating light, a light that is not stable, it's a floating light. It's a kind of vulnerable kind of object, is burning. And it's not a light that is being shown in any other condition but burning. So the idea of religion introduced in the setting of the play right in the beginning. Then we see that Mary, the full details are in it this morning. 7 wounds, he had one either in the neck, with an exit wound beneath the left shoulder blade, another in the left breast penetrating the heart. And now, are you taking care of, I hope you are taking care of these words which do have these omitted sound of g, right? If you look at this word morning, in it this morning, it is not being said as morning and neither being written as it is. It says morning, morning, so G is omitted. Here the very much colloquial expression, colloquial way of talking was presented by the writer. The same goes on with endearing and penetrating. See, so the G sound is not only omitted here, it is shown that this is how they spoke the language. Okay, and what does it show? It shows, it gives the idea of violence. So the idea of violence and the idea of religion, and then we will see how both of these ideas coincide in the later stage, is basically introduced in the very beginning of the play when the setting is being set. Okay, let's move on. And here you can see on the screen a replication of the image of the setting, how the setting would have been. You can see, although it looks very spacious here, however, it might have not been the same way. It is just an imagination. And we can see a rundown house. We can see an old sofa, giving us an impression of their social status of the family. Anchor hanging there. Hanging clothes. So there is no separate compartments, there are no cupboards, there is no privacy. Clothes are lying here and there. Okay, so moving on with the plot, we will see that 4 main strands are introduced in Act 1 and developed throughout the play. So the writer introduces the strand in the Act 1, however, then these are further developed in the different acts of the play. What are these strands? These plot development strands are Johnny and his involvements with the diehards. Johnny is the son of the Boyle's family, Boyle's son, who is involved in the revolutionary movement and is a part of diehards group. Now, which one is the diehard group? That is a question for you to understand. Which one is the Free State group and which one is the diehard group? You need to know it by heart so you are able to make meaning of it and the right meaning of the statements. This is the first strand that talks about Johnny as an individual, as a male individual who is part of either of the groups, political groups of the time. By this, the writer wants to convey that each individual, in fact, no matter what age he belongs to, however, primarily the youngsters, they belong to either of the groups, either the diehards or the Free Staters. However, what it resulted in, what their involvement with any of the political party resulted in, basically, the more and more chaos and loss of lives. Alright, the second strand that writer shows is of Mary and her relationship with Bentham. Who is Mary? Mary is the daughter of Boyle's family. Boyle's daughter is Mary, who is shown with a very close and significant relationship with Bentham. These two characters, and particularly the character of Mary, is showing the conditions of the society, the particular conditions of female individuals of a particular age, youth, who were so disillusioned that they would try to create a life of their own fancies, an idealized life. And in the idealized life, what kind of threats and what kind of harms they get into, what are the different kinds of problems they get into, that is shown through Mary's character and her relationship with a fellow who is known as Bentham in the drama. This is the second strand. Then the introduction of the will. You understand what the will is? It's a noun. It's a kind of written document that is left by a person who is dead. So this will that apparently changes the expectations of the family creates a very different kind of situation, at times funny. However, this fun has irony inside. So the will has a very significant role to play inside the drama. And then Junu and Boyle's relationship. Junu is the mother of the family, the woman of the family, and Boyle is the male head of the family. How their relationship go on? What kind of relationship do they keep? Who is the one who is keeping a dominant role here? When we Now, when we recently finished our very first text, the kind of relationship we studied in Doll's House would be very fresh in your mind. I want you to understand this relationship in comparison with the relationship that we studied in A Doll's House between Nora and her husband. Okay, so moving on, we understand that in the very beginning, the writer opens up all the 4 strands that he further developed in the rest of the drama. And these 4 strands include Johnny and the things relevant, Mary, the will, and Juno and the boy's relationship. Okay, this let us understand what our different characters are. Juno is the woman, female guardian. Boyle is the male guardian of the family, Mary is the daughter, Johnny is the son, and then the minor characters include Bentham, Joxer, Jerry, and Mrs. Tancred. Okay, let's have a look at these characters and what kind of characteristics they would involve. Captain Boyle is basically the head of the family. He keeps a lot of energy. He's a light-hearted tone person who you think you know it all. He's the kind of person who would portray what I think is that I know everything, who act as though you have to explain everything to Mrs. Boyle. All the time he's pretending, or he is in fact explaining everything to Mrs. Boyle. He avoids conflict in scenes at all cost. He would just avoid a conflict. He would be the person who would not like to keep any conflict and would simply give away whenever he would see that it is coming up. And the picture that I'm showing you is basically this movie was filmed and Sean Connery was the actor who played the role of Captain Boyle. So this picture has been taken from the cast of that particular film. The drama has been filmed as well, and if you somehow happen to see the film, it will again create very comfortable situation for you to understand what Sean O'Casey conveys in his writing. Alright, we understand that a drama is meant for action. A drama has to be enacted. So if apart reading this drama, you somehow are able to manage watching drama as the film, it'll be great source of better understanding. Okay, Mrs. Juno Boyle. Susan played the character of Mrs. Juno Boyle, and she's a smart woman with strong opinions. Act like your opinion matters. Now here you can draw a comparison between Nora's and Juno's character. What Ibsen shows a woman is a doll-like figure who apparently does not keep any strong opinion and who would like to act accordingly his husband wish. And here we see Juno as a very strong and smart character who keeps opinion and act like her opinions matter. Now she lets Mr. Boyle talk, except that he'll say something stupid. So she let her husband talk, however she knows that it is very rare that he makes a sensible comment. She's caring towards children. She is a caring mother, as Nora was. Be concerned with Mary's flirtiousness and Johnny's hallucination. Now, both of these words are of importance. Flirtiousness, this word describes Mary's character portrayed by the writer, and hallucination, again this word describes the Johnny's character in the play. Let's have a look at Bentham, Charles Bentham. And if you could recognize him so far, he is basically the young fellow who apparently gets in love with Mary Boyle. Now, what type of character Bentham is? He embodies the player's ladies' man persona. So he's a kind of playboy character who would like to charm girls. He has sneaky eyes, that shows his deceptive personality. Be well spoken and confident. He's a person who can speak very well and who shows a lot of confidence. So you will not find Bentham as Johnny, and probably you find Bentham in contrast to Johnny's character. However, I want you to draw your own comparison and see whether he stands in comparison with Johnny, or they both are entirely different characters. Since he speaks very well, he's very confident, he dresses very well. So he's a well-dressed, well-spoken, and quite a confident person. He's refined and seemingly above these people. He's a very refined character, apparently, and also shows that he is a separate category of person who is very well composed, and the distortion, the destruction of war, the chaotic situation could not do much harm to this character. All right, after that, what will make us interest in the character is going to be Mary Boyle. That is a character that keeps a very close connection with Bentham's character. Mary Boyle is the daughter of the Boyle's family. What kind of character Mary Boyle is? She's a shallow, vain way of speaking. She's a shallow character, kind of character who does not show any kind of depth or sense, and she has a vain way of speaking. She will not make any impressive kind of speech throughout the play. Whenever she would speak, she will speak, you know, very surface level comments that would not include a lot of thinking and intellect. She has judgmental looks. These are the people who would like to judge people from their appearances. You remember, we had one theme in the last play that we discussed, and that was appearances versus reality. And what we discussed, a book should not be judged by its cover. However, how we are understanding Mary Boyle here as judgmental looks towards everyone. She will like to see everyone in a particular way, and then she will form her attitude and understanding accordingly. Be completely absorbed in flirting with Bentham. She is the one who is, regardless of what is happening around her, what is her social status, what is her family's condition, what is the social scenario outside in the world, she is very indifferent to all of these aspects, and she is just flirting and totally flirting with Bentham. Uninterested in political and religious talk. So her indifferent attitude is not without any reason. The reason is she has no interest in politics, and she is least bothered about religion as well. And that is how we see her personality formed into the character that she plays. Okay, then we have Johnny Boyle's character. One very interesting character, in fact. Joseph Gordon played this character when this drama was first filmed. He acts uneasy, pace often, and shift eyes. Now, he's a kind of character who will not show a self of a composed person. Because a person who is composed and calm, you will see the person will not show kind of uneasy gestures. You're shifting your body parts here and there, and he paces often, very swiftly, very quickly. He would try to do things very quickly, move his hands quickly, pick up things, put down them, without thinking, without planning. So he's a kind of disturbed person. Now, what is the reason of this disturbance? We will later on analyze. And since he is a disturbed person and he has a personality that keeps unrest and uneasiness, he shifts his eyes very quickly, moving eyes very quickly. If you happen to watch plays that try to portray the royal characters, the drama characters from, in fact, the Mughal period, or if you happen to see English movies and English drama where these royal characters are played. For example, if you happen to see any of the Shakespearean drama in film form, you would see and you would observe that characters are very composed. They are very calm, no matter how upset they are deep inside. This feeling of being disturbed will not be shown on their face. They are able to control their emotions, and that makes them look and behave mature. This is one aspect. Second is that they will not show haphazard movements. Their movements are very much planned. They think before doing, they think before speaking. The third important thing that you will notice is that, and you will notice it even in your surroundings, when you meet some people or a person who is aged, who is mature, you will see that person keeps a certain pace of moving, blinking and shifting eyes. They're not very swift in it. They are not very often in it, and they keep a rhythmic pace, right? However, in innocent children, in small children, in the age of 3, 4, 5, 6, you will find that children, they are very quick in pacing and they are very swift in shifting their eyes. All the time they are shifting their gaze here and there, and all the time they are blinking their eyes, right? So this is basically a difference that your inner self would maintain in your appearance. Okay, another aspect of Johnny's personality, very interesting, is that he's afraid of ghosts. He's afraid of these horror talks. When topic of ghost comes up, he gets defensive and shuddered through lines. He starts stammering. Pure horror at sight of Tancred, you see it, no one else does. Okay, so after knowing Johnny's character, we are ready to understand and go through writer's life experience and his works accordingly. Let us have a look at Sean O'Casey's birth. Sean O'Casey, born in Dublin, the youngest child of a respectable Protestant clerk. Protestant clerk was basically his father, so that let us know what kind of social status he would keep. Not a very rich guy right from the beginning, but a kind of quite a mediocre person. His father died when he was 6 years old, and he became deeply devoted to his mother. Understanding the social status they were living in, and then bearing the loss of his father's death, he became completely devoted, more responsible than his age would expect towards his family, and particularly towards his mother. Now, in the age of 94, in the 14 years of age, he was sent to work. So you can understand what kind of financial crunch he would be, that he started working at the age of 14, where this is the age of normal schooling. Alright, so learning very swift actions in 14 years of life of Sean O'Casey, let us move on to his involvement in social or political or country based movements. In 1906, he got involved in nationalist movements as secretary of the Irish-speaking Gaelic League and a member of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. So in the age of 20, he got his first attachment with a nationalist movement, and he became an active member of Irish Republican Brotherhood. So this is how a young fellow of his age would be. At the age of 40, he left home for the first time, and disgusted. This happened because he got disgusted by his brother's drinking. So, in the family who is bearing loss of their father's death, who is into financial condition where a child has to go for work, and even in the age of 40, when he sees his siblings who are indulged into social ills like drinking, he leaves his house. So what kind of mental trauma he is in, you can see here. What kind of domestic atmosphere he keeps, what kind of social atmosphere, what kind of political scenario, what kind of, all these things are basically forming and making up a man's mind, a man's or a person's thinking process. So in 1919, his mother died. Just a year before he left his house, we understand that his mother died. And I would personally think that since he was very devoted to his mother, he basically was going on with the kind of setup he was in. However, as soon as his mother is over, he was able to take the decision of leaving his household. The Abbé, when we were discussing the history of drama, we went through the existence of the Abbé Theatre and the importance of the Abbé Theatre. The Abbé Theatre rejected his first play, and this was a kind of big shock for the writer. Juno and the Peacock was an unprecedented success at the Abbé. It was a great success, unmatchable success. However, in 1924, and this we can see on the screen that this would have taken him 4 to 5 years to struggle to let the play be on stage on the Abbé Theatre. O'Casey was still a laborer mixing concrete. So now see his fights, see the different fronts that he's fighting on as an individual, and see his social status even in the age of 44. His play comes up on the stage in 1924 when he's almost 44 years of age. However, when he reaches this point, he is still a laborer who mixes concrete as profession. Okay. In 1927, however, he gets married. He marries actress Eileen, who basically played the role of Nora in The Plough and the Stars in London. In 1930, film of Juno and the Peacock was first directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and it got released. Copy of the film was, however, burned in the street by Irish nationalists in Limerick. So you can see, even by 1930, his work was not acceptable for Irish nationalist movement, and his ideas and themes were not appreciated by a layman over there. Okay, now in 1964, however, the ban was lifted on Irish productions so that the Abbé could present Juno and the Peacock in the World Theatre season in London. And this is the time when the play was bloomed, and it got heavy appreciation from around the world, and it was first being published by theatered by Abbé in London in the seasons of drama. And finally, eventually he dies, and that is 18th of September in Torbay. In his later years, however, O'Casey ceased writing for the stage and put all his creative energy into his highly entertaining and interesting 6-volume autobiography. So we see that though so far he had been writing plays that would represent the social, political, religious ills and problems of the society. However, at a certain stage, before he died, in his later and last years, I would say, he started writing his personal autobiography that had 6 volumes, which is very interesting and entertaining. And as we see his life right from the beginning till the age of 40-45, we see that he basically has witnessed all those crimes himself. So his autobiography will not be less than a story of interesting twists and crosses. Basically, he was 13th child in a Protestant family. So he had 12 siblings, 12 brothers and sisters. And hence, he had a grim childhood, he had a poor eyesight and ill health. A person who is financially not stable, who's a clerk, and then he dies when his son is almost 6. And he has a family where they have 14 children. And this particular son, Sean O'Casey, he keeps an ill health, he has a poor eyesight. So what kind of childhood and the adulthood and the youth the writer would have gone through, you can understand. His father was a clerk, his mother raised her children alone after O'Casey's father died. 2 of his most appealing characters are created by his mother's image. We find that Ibsen kept a close relation with his mother and he loved his mother, and that is how he stayed in that domestic situation until she was alive and until she died, and that made her perceive 2 of his wonderful characters just as the way his mother was. The first Irish playwright to write about the Dublin working classes. He is known and famous for the first Irish playwright who basically wrote for Dublin working class, the class he himself belonged to. And this brings us now understand and go through briefly about Sean O'Casey's plays and his works. Sean O'Casey's plays. Early in his adult life, during the amateur theatre movement, and in early 40s, he had quick succession of 3 realistic plays about the slums of Dublin: The Shadow of the Gunman, Juno and the Paycock, and The Plough and the Stars. Basically, these are 3 masterpieces that Sean O'Casey produced. These 3 plays provoked public outcry mainly because of O'Casey's consistent refusal to glorify the violence of the nationalist movement, instead mocking the heroics of war and presenting the theme that dead heroes were far outnumbered by dead innocent people. What O'Casey wanted to convey, and what he conveyed basically, was the very much idea of uselessness of the war activity. He says, yes, there would have been definitely the heroes who would fought for the right things, who would have fought for the right reason. However, the outnumbered innocent deaths should be considered, which basically cause then families, individuals, mothers, daughters and sons live alone and get disillusioned. So this is how, this was basically his consistent rejection of this warfare that he provoked and conveyed through his works, and made people complain and stand with him against the glorified violence of the time, that was the nationalist movement. And it's Sean O'Casey who says, all the world's a stage and most of us are desperately unrehearsed. Alright, Sean O'Casey's works, Juno and the Paycock, 1924 and The Plough and the Stars 1926. In 6 years' time, basically, he writes two of his masterpieces. Probably O'Case's two finest plays they are. Both deal with the impact of the Irish Civil War as the background on the working class poor of the city. So basically he's the one who takes care of three things in his works. He presents the poverty of the society, he presents hence the working class of the Dublin especially, and he presents both of these things in the background of Irish Civil War. And the touch of these themes is in all of his works, and they can primarily be found in three of his masterpieces. Juno and the Peacock was successfully filmed by Alfred Hitchcock, and I would suggest you to watch it. In 1959, O'Case gave his blessing to a musical adaptation of the play by American composer, the musical retitled Juno. Okay, the play was first named as Juno. However, it got retitled as Juno and the Peacock. And in almost 60, he gave the permission of a musical adaptation of the play in America to an American composer. Now, let's have a word about the play and its social significance. What play presents basically is a kind of relationship, a matrix of four components: women, men, mothers, and relationships in general, as well as in a family's tie. So, since this has a relevance with the time in which the writer himself lived in and the time he is trying to present in his work, hence it is of great importance. What was the women's right? What was general human rights? How did women and men get together in social bonds, not only as husband and wife, sister and brother, girl and beloved, or man and beloved, and also mothers, because he had a strong affection for his mother. So mother was one relationship that inspired Sean O'Case's writings a lot. In Juno and the Peacock, or Peacock, represents the chaos that Juno endures during the play. Basically, Peacock and the Juno, relation between both of these characters, Juno as a woman of the household, and Peacock as an animal, was very beautified, glorified kind of bird who has different colors of society. But what is the relationship between both of these characters? We will get to know when we will start with the themes and character analysis to understand the play. In mythology, the name Juno is the Roman name for Hera, the goddess of marriage, and the peacock is her symbol. Now, this brings us to have our very first reference, the very first allusion from the Roman mythology. It says that Juno is a Roman name that was the name of a goddess of marriage, goddess of institution of marriage. If you remember and you can recall, this is the play about, the very first play that we discussed. And the peacock is her symbol. Each god and goddesses, they have their own symbols, right? So for this goddess, the symbol was peacock. And that probably was the bird of her carriage as well. The carriage she would sit on and she would fly. These were the birds that she used in her carriage. Now, the Boyle family. The Boyle family is a representation basically of a working class family in Dublin in their attempt to escape their dilemmas. Their dilemmas are poverty, number one, religion, number two, their internal bonds, inside family bonds, their relationships to each other. So these are these three basic dilemmas that are presented through the Boyle's family. Then the dilemma of mother, dilemma of father, dilemma of daughter, and dilemma of son. Alienated from each other. These are the gaps and differences that they are facing, and that these which are portrayed as the gaps in the relationships in a family by Sean O'Casey. Now, women in Juno and the Peacock. Juno Boyle is basically, although she is a woman, however, in contrast to what Ibsen shows in his plays, she is the breadwinner. She earns family bread. She is realist in the family. She is the one who would not like to keep a fanciful idea of life, an idea of a life of ideal life. She lives in reality, she fights for reality, and in return she is able to fight the reality. She shows her strength in adversity. Basically, the strengths and weaknesses are best portrayed in the time when they are required. So, adversity is a kind of situation when you really show your strength, your power to fight with unpleasant, unwanted. Mary Boyle, who is, although another female representation of the society, however, her age, she belongs to the youth category, then another kind of female representation from the similar society. We have two different kinds of female representation. One is a very strong woman, women of great ideas, women of great strength, who is a realist, who would like to fight for her bad times, who would like to earn for her family, and shows strength of standing strong in the bad times too. And the second category shows the character of Mary Boyle, young girl on strike for her principle. She thinks that she keeps principles, and she's all the time on strike for her principles. Blinded by appearances. Her dilemma is that she's not able to make sense of difference between appearances and reality. And that is why, since she does not have that eye of finding reality, she feels quite happy with appearances. And this very shallow understanding of human and human life destroys this character. Then we have men in Juno and the Peacock. What kind of men do we have? We have three different categories of men presented in this play. Boyle, Jack Boyle, man of the family. Idleness, a real cripple in life. Man is always reading lately, nothing but trash too. A man who would like to make judgmental kind of comments, no matter whether they portray reality or not, but he would like to say it in any case. I'm hardly able to crawl with the pains in me legs. Me legs. You see the use of language here. It portrays an aspect of someone's personality. So, all the time complaining about the pains he has, all the time complaining about the physical condition he is into, all the time complaining about and giving reasons not to work and not to keep up with his responsibilities towards his family. Jack Boyle, self-deception. He is a character who shows self-deception, talking with a commanding and complicit gestures. I don't care a damn now about their parents. They are bringing their father's gray hairs down with sorrow to the grave and laughing at it. So this is how he would talk. Captain's able to take care of himself. Another dialogue from the play to let you understand Jack Boyle's character. Okay, now Johnny's character. Johnny is the son of the family, suffering from his betrayal to his comrade. He betrayed his party, and that becomes his dilemma. Showing no sympathy to his sister. What kind of sister-brother relationship they share is a kind of another representation of relationships, family relationships that O'Casey brings forward. Joxerdale is a minor character. He's a kind of parasite, a crawler who would like to spend his life on someone else's shoulder. He would like to breathe, but through your intake of oxygen. Who would not like to work for himself. Jerry Devine, another minor character, judging love from material things, always commenting and passing judgments, and measuring love from with a reference to materials, wealth and money a person has. Turning his back on Mary when knowing she's having Bantham's baby. So an introduction of illegitimate relationship and the results and consequences that Sean O'Casey brings forward here. Jerry has a role to play here in it. What is basically the scenario we will discuss in detail in our next lecture. Charlie Bantam, the character, the portrayal of deception, bring fantasy and disillusion in Mary's life and eventually to the Boyle family. He is basically a character who presents disillusionment of the youth and fanciful, idealistic kind of attitude of the youth of the time. Mothers in Juno and the Peacock. I told you that the relationship of mother had a very significant place in the writer's life. So we are able to see this significance in his writings as well. While facing the death of their sons, Mrs. Tancred, despairing and anticipates her own death. Oh blessed Virgin, where were you when me darling son was riddled with bullets? Well, she's a kind of character who would show sorrow and pain that she takes for her children. Juno Boyle, hardy and resolute. Ah, what can God do gain the stupidity of man? So these are two mothers that would give you the reflections of O'Casey's experience with his mother and what he perceived her mother like. His mother like, sorry. Okay, so this brings us to the end of lecture 9. So let us review what we studied here. We had a conclusive talk about the Doll's House, the drama written by Henrik Ibsen, which was our very first text that we did so far. Now we have recently started with our second text, drama script, that is Juno and the Peacock by Sean O'Casey. And in today's talk, we had an introduction of the play, including an overall overview of the play that includes play's background, the kind of setting writer introduces, the plot writer uses, different characters who are making this plot happen, writer's life and work, and the influence of writer's life on the kind of works that he produces and on the kind of themes that he represents, and the play and its social significance with the time it is presented. Okay, so what we are going to do further in our talk is we are going to have an overview of the plot. We will discuss this general vision presented in the drama, the cultural context in which the drama is presented, the play as reflection of social and personal influences, social, that relates it to the history of Irish Civil War, and personal, the history of the background of the writer's life, the play's title versus context, reference and relevance. We will discuss the title in detail. Then we may touch upon the themes and issues in the next talk, or it will definitely be agenda for the coming lectures, where we will discuss 3 major themes emerging out of the text: poverty, religion, reality and fantasy. This was all I had to discuss for lecture 9. Now see you inshallah for the next lecture, lecture 10. By then, Allah Hafiz.